So we're going back on stage again. We're going to be live in the Cork Opera House on March 30th for a very special event, which is going to form part of the Cork Podcast Festival. Our show is called Look Who's Talking. It's going to be all about those criminals. How do we get them into studio? How do we get up close and personal with them? And what have they got to say when the cameras are off? So Cork Opera House, tickets from corkpodcastfestival.ie, 30th of March. See you there.
From this list of houses that the Criminal Assets Bureau are putting up for sale, the most impressive has to be the White House in County Louth. A reserve price of $475,000. But, I mean, it looks like something out of, do you remember Dallas and Dynasty?
Yeah. There's a bit of
that, isn't it?
A bit of Dallas Dynasty influence going on. There's definitely kind of a 1985 vibe.
Yeah. Just because I had a conversation with somebody about this house. And they thought it was beautiful. And I thought, I'm never going to speak to you again.
Well, it depends. I mean, if you like high gates, ornate gates, and, a fountain to kind of a drive, a turning circle in your front of your house, and marble staircases, and, it's pretty plush. It's a certain taste, all right.
Yeah, it's a certain taste, isn't it? You're so diplomatic.
It mightn't suit everybody, but, hey, you can't really impose your own sort of...
So let's describe it. As you say, you come up a driveway and there's a fountain for you to turn your car around. There's pillars and a sort of a balcony up the top and an old sort of Georgian-style door. There's something a bit American looking about this. It's a little bit... What do you say? It's 1980s?
Yeah, it is that kind of South Fork, isn't it? And South Fork, of course, is the place where Dallas was set.
Yes.
We're probably showing our age now, because anyone under...
They won't have a clue what Dallas was.
Like 45 won't.
Sunset Boulevard, I think, is, or whatever you call it, buying
Hollywood
Sunset or something.
901 or whatever.
So it is what it is. Look, I mean, a bit of background on this, Eamon, then. Who owned it and why is it up for sale?
Well, it's up for sale because it was declared the proceeds of crime. I think there is going to be a certain amount being given back. It's Edward Chiper and his wife Natalie had been living there, and he was identified as a leader of a transnational crime gang. They were shipping drugs from North Africa on yachts to Spain, and from there to both Russia and to Ireland. This is all in affidavit evidence in the Criminal Assets Bureau case against them last year. I suppose the investigation would have been sparked when I think there was a large consignment of cannabis was found in the very large spacious garage, which is available to see online now through the estate agents. And that pretty much launched the investigation into them. Obviously the house, there was fabulously appointed. There's a tennis court there. They figured there's at least €40,000 spent at that point. I don't think it was finished at that stage when the Criminal Assets Bureau came knocking. There was the dog run, which was 126,000 on its own, they estimated. And they had the 4 dogs that could roam. Like there was a full CCTV system as well, of which none of the cameras were pointed at the garage, which is why they weren't actually criminally prosecuted. They were originally charged with possession of the drugs. It's a couple of 100,000 of cannabis. But the case against them was dropped because it couldn't be proved that other people didn't have access to it despite the security. But there were other workmen. They had a couple of different kind of companies that were used. And some people who were employed in it, according to the cab evidence, these were actually members of the gang. And that money that was being put through was an attempt, I suppose, to layer the money, to hide the source of the money, to make it look like this is a legit painting, decorating company. And that gang members were getting their money through, legitimate means, but obviously they weren't. So
there's an equestrian centre, by the way, in this as well, isn't there? They have an equestrian area outside the back of it as well, or something.
No, it's a big patio area. Like it could be, there's a very large patio area,
horses around your patio.
Small horses, little Shetland ponies maybe, and there's the tennis court, of course, and they do have a nice view.
The kind of thing, like, was the Chiper, was he on the? He's Moldovan, of course, isn't he? And was he on the radar of the Gardaí, or was this a case of neighbours raising eyebrows, wondering how the hell did these people afford this?
I think there was, as they say, acting on intelligence led to this raid, and then, because of the obvious wealth the Criminal Assets Bureau brought in, and they made contact with the likes of the Drug Enforcement Administration and maritime monitoring crowd as well, whose full long title I can never remember. And they said, yeah, you're dealing with somebody who's involved in serious crime. And they actually, from their Romanian counterparts, got, the full breakdown of the gang, who was the leaders, all the background about, Natalie's claim to have, been an accountant where she got her degree from. Edward Chiper, I think, he was a doctor, he was claiming to be. And they were able to give the full breakdown of the gang and how it operated, the different people involved. There was pretty much a kind of a clan-based grouping as well, and different contacts that they had as well in Europe. So, I mean, there were certainly the picture being painted by the international law enforcement was not that these were a small-time group.
Right.
These were proper international operators.
Now, who do you think will be interested in the house? I mean, it'd be a fabulous, I suppose.
No, I mean,
home,
it's up on it's in, like, we went down initially when we first got information, when it was mentioned in cab, we went down to take a pic. Now, it was kind of awkward to get a pic. We got it through the big ornate electric gates, which a gate maker I asked would say was a minimum of 20 grand, these motorized gates. And, they're quite tall. I don't know, whatever they are, like 12 feet, 9 feet, they're...
And fencing around it as well, which I'm sure you could multiply that
There's
again.
fencing and huge Leylandii trees as well. So, I mean, it was completely private. So there was only one place you could take a shot. So you had to kind of go up. And when I say a shot, I mean, it was only with a camera. And you had to go up and do a little kind of U-turn in this cul-de-sac, which is about 7 miles north of Drogheda. And it was, there were some lovely houses on this cul-de-sac. And you're kind of aware, our Sunday World vehicle going up and doing a kind of a U-turn and a slow crawl back down you're kind of expecting somebody's going to be calling the guards,
Yeah.
But it's a lovely area. I mean, it's a fabulous view from the back of their house. I mean, it's going to appeal to people, and that's it. And I mean, and they effectively gave it up. They did an agreement with CAB, like it didn't go to full hearing. So I mean, they settled the case. So and that means more than likely that the costs won't be awarded against them, and they get a percentage back. Off the top of my head, I think it's 10%, but I'm not sure that they had some of their own legitimate income, or it was accepted that this is a legitimate income. And so they'll get some of the money back from whatever sale. But the houses in that area, I remember looking, and they're about 600,000. But this again is finished to such a high standard that
if you can cope with marble under your feet in Ireland, it's not really the sort of like beautiful in Italy or in hot countries, because of course it's so cold under the marble. Yeah,
I'm sure there is. I've no doubt. Yeah. I think there is, actually. I can't remember, but they estimated that 1.2 million was spent on it.
Right.
So I mean, if you get it for 475, because maybe nobody wants to bid on it because they're nervous of previous owners or whatever, and someone's going to get a property that costs the previous owner 1.2 million. I mean, it was an unfinished site. Somebody obviously, I presume it was. Whatever reason, somebody, had planned permission to build, a sizable house, and it was a shell, it was block shell. I think some of it was actually still on Google Earth. If you're really desperate, you go back and have a look yourself. And they bought that for 200,000 and then put the rest of their money in, over £1 million. So that's where the 1.2 figure comes from. And now it's got a reserve price of 475. So, I mean, it could be a bargain for someone.
It certainly could. Now, at the other end of the scale when it comes to property is a house belonging to Ross Browning, which is in Finglas and is boarded up and looks like it's not going to fetch anything like that, but I'm sure it probably will fetch quite a lot. But this is a house Browning sort of tried to conceal as being his, of course, recently, and we took a little virtual tour around his property in Garristown, which was also taken by the Criminal Assets Bureau and sold, a far more plush property. But this is a sort of a derelict house.
No, it's not. It looks it there, but it's not. No, if you get into it, it's actually finished to a very high standard on the inside.
It just looks derelict on the outside. How
well,
clever.
it's just boarded up, and so it's kind of, and it's from the front it looks kind of small, but it's got a little annex at the back and everything, which is can be a standalone office or studio, like using the auctioneer phraseology. It's a great investor potential in this house.
Right.
No, it's all lovely dark flooring that was put in. It was originally a fire damaged house, and it was bought for a very low price.
Who did it up?
Well, that's the question. That this is what they went to court about.
Yeah.
And that it was an uncle of Ross Browning who had bought it. And while he was the owner, it was done up. And again, it's alleged that all of this was done with Ross Browning's cash.
Right.
And then his cousin, Ian O'Hare, a convicted drug smuggler who was caught in Australia trying to bring cocaine in, he bought it then for a bargain price of something like 120,000.
Okay.
And then I think there was a tenant in there paying rent. up until they recently vacated it and handed it, basically CAB got the court order when the whole case against Browning and Chestnut Lodge and Garristown, where he had his big complex. So this is one of the smaller properties that was connected to that, along with all the other bits and pieces like Rolex watches and
there was properties down Hyde Road, wasn't there, in Limerick as well, that were linked to him?
Yeah, there was properties linked to him. They would have been...
they would have been currency, really, because they were sort of suspected of being handed to him by the Dundon McCarthy mob, the Dundon brothers in particular, in lieu of debts owed. They kind of cuckooed and took a lot of houses in the Hyde Road.
And if you remember, we had a Dublin assassin who was living in one of these properties as well while working for one of the Limerick gangs as well. So, I mean, again, it shows you how all these guys cooperate all the time and that there is a bit of kind of a board level discussions go on among people that you wouldn't necessarily think of anything in common.
And look at the little house owned by Owen Maguire. Now, I think that would slightly put me off. In New Bliss in County Monahan, it's like a little sort of thing out of a storybook. Little cottage.
This is, I suppose, it would stretch doer upper to the limit. It's a derelict cottage, essentially, with a tree growing out of the front of it. It's pretty tiny.
Yeah,
I think it's on 0.4 of an acre or something like that, and it's going for 35,000. Now, there was actually two of these, and Owen and Brendan Maguire both had kind of these little small bits of land that they'd bought in Monahan. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was the wider. I mean, it was mostly about the money. I think that was found under the tiles of his house in Cement Road.
I suppose Owen Maguire, for anybody who doesn't remember, was the mob boss that was shot in 2018, who was shot rather by Robbie Lawler, kicking off the Drogheda feud, which was a particularly vicious, long-running feud that brought that town to its knees. But Owen Maguire lived on Cement Road, I think still lives on Cement Road in Drogheda. Have they connections to Monahan? Or?
They probably do. I mean... I don't know. I mean, it's no more than Ross Browning also had little patches of land out in Rush, which are, you presumably people are going to have an idea of maybe putting some kind of chalet on it or a mobile home by the coast.
I always reckoned he'd gone on holidays out there as a child because that place out in Rush, and I remember being out at it, was very much, I was talking to somebody who was there, said that a lot of families from the North Inner City, when he would have been a child, went out there on holidays and they literally, pitched up a caravan, or in some cases they had sort of built little shacks and then they'd sort of gained squatters' rights, ownership over them and stuff. Yeah. Quite an interesting little place out there that you wouldn't necessarily be drawn to. But yeah, no doubt, the Maguires maybe have links to this area, New Bliss of County Monahan. Cute little house though. I think I prefer that to the giant White House one.
Well, you'd have to up your DIY skills, I'd imagine. Well, not to mention a bit of block laying and
there would be that.
Roof slating and so on.
The tree, for God's sake, and then
Well, you could try and make it a feature, sort of indoor arboreum, or whatever the word is. You can try and upsell it.
But I mean, what did the Criminal Assets Bureau get from the Maguires? Do you recall? There was money in the attic or whatever. There was 200 and something thousand that was seized at one point during a raid on the house at Cement Road. That was during the feud. But there was very little kind of tangible assets identified, I think, showing that they weren't that sophisticated an organisation, as some others might be. They were sort of making a lot of money, but it was only in recent times in the Drogheda area, probably because of the cocaine boom.
Yeah, these like this little property in New Bliss was one of two, and they were the only two properties, and they were both in similar condition. Right. I think the tumble down, was the phrase used in court. And otherwise, then it was two properties, a Rolex watch and 305,000, and some of that would have been the cash that was found in the eaves of the house where he was shot, which is kind of, it's also on Cement Road. It's not where he's living now. He kind of had his own little, like a bay in what would have been a halting site at one stage. And then he's now in one of these little chalets where Owen also had a house as well before.
Provided by the council.
Yeah, provided by the council.
So provided by and paid for the council, while at the same time these assets are identified and seized by the Criminal Assets Bureau. It's a mad country, isn't it?
Yeah. But I mean, you look at the one recently about Ray Colopy in Limerick, when he was still on the dole while flying around Europe organising international drug deals. Yeah. And getting his disability allowance.
That's what really, really riles me up now, that. Because I do actually think that, there's a lot of people out there who really, really need their social welfare. And then you have these kind of
Well, you hear stories about people
jokers
who are working as carers and
Yeah.
really struggling to get
Yeah.
kind of their funding, like
Exactly.
and it's a very modest amount, like but it's all they can look forward to try and get any kind of income, and then
people
then you
on
have serious
disability who
criminals.
can't actually work and who really need to be provided help from the state, and then you have these serious criminals who are claiming this money, and it all adds up to a huge, and they don't even need it. I mean, that's the thing. They don't even need it because they have so much themselves, but it's a greed or it's an entitlement, is it?
There's that, and I also think they have this idea, well, look, this is my legitimate income, because if they, I suppose that there's an idea that, if CAB come at you and you say, look, you're not getting social welfare, you don't seem to have a job, therefore you must be involved in crime. But if you were able to say, well, actually I'm on the dole, so I'm getting my disability money, or I'm getting job seekers allowance, or whatever it is, and then it looks like you can say, well, this is my legitimate income, and and you hear it all the time, like like in the Calverton cab case, it was like all this large scale, 20, 30, whatever it was, €1,000 worth of refurbishment done was being saved from social welfare, and the point was that, well, at one stage had 15 children all on child benefit allowance, and therefore, which is quite an amount of money coming in every month, but it's obviously a ridiculous argument.
Yeah, to say that you're able to save it.
Yeah.
Lena Stokes' cottage, where is this? And this, to be honest with you, I think this would be too much for me now even to...
Yeah, well, it's probably a slight upgrade.
Have we just got the one picture of the inside of the house where it looks as if there's been a fire or something?
No, there's a lot more. It's exactly what happened. There was a fire. It was
Okay.
as a result of feud-related arson attack. So Lena Stokes would be, she would have been married to, she was described in court as the estranged wife of Sonny Stokes. So he was targeted basically by CAB. They were, he lost his case. It was a stolen car ring in County Longford. And this house, she claims that the 45,000 used to buy it was money left to her by her father, and that she had planned to go back and live there, when she was retiring, or she was going to, spend her twilight years there, and that she had a certain amount of money from credit union account, and and this all went into buying it. But the CAB's case was that no, this was actually really, although it was in her name, it was coming from her husband's criminality. And, Judge Owens kind of very much, he said, look, there's no way she could not have known that her husband was involved in serious crime. So she lost the case. But it looks pretty grim. It's pretty smashed up, and
a lot of work to do. And I'm interested in this, and is this the final one? There's a site as well, but this house in Kildare that's owned by Adam Keating with an E. Because I remember when he started to show up at those CAB lists, Adam Keating, and somebody just said to me to keep an eye on him, that he'd an interesting story. So he, of course, is described as this sort of showbiz cocaine dealer, and the house is in County Kildare at Ellistown. It's a rural 5-bed bungalow on the banks of the Grand Canal, and the reserve price on that is 195,000. Now, he was sort of described, I think, in the CAB case as being a significant player in the Fat Freddie Thompson gang, but he had the whole look, Adam Keating. He had this little sort of goatee beard, and he did look like a sort of a DJ, a sort of a showbizy influencer type. He just didn't look right in the whole criminal proceedings around the Criminal Assets Bureau. Yeah,
I think his kind of role was leasing properties that the gang members could use, and so I suppose it'd be kind of a, how would you say, a supporting role.
Yeah.
And he was caught with cocaine in Northern Ireland. And I was at one bail hearing. It was heard that he was one of a group of men heavily involved in criminal operations, and that he had planned to test, import and supply cocaine. There was a lot of phone messages and stuff found on his phone. And I think CAB accepted the evidence. Like, there was no explanation for the large sums of money went through his bank account or accounts of entities linked to him. So I think there was a company involved in doing some of these music promotions. And that, there was a lot of, I suppose CAB would take the view that a lot of deliberate bad bookkeeping to make it look like, so try and disguise where the money's coming from and where it went as well. So, I mean, he lost his case. I know he took appeals. He seems to get upset, I think, when every so often it comes up. like I think his partner would have been in the house up until recently enough, and that the last court case, or the last hearing at that was that there was storm damage and they wanted to stay in it a bit longer to repair that so they get insurance. But this was said, look, you're not going to get insurance anyway because of, it's a cab targeted property at this stage. So they eventually, I think it was last August before cab were able to seize it. So now it's up for sale, and we'll see how it goes.
We'll see how that one goes. And then finally, of this sort of grouping of properties that the Criminal Assets Bureau are selling is a site in South County Dublin, one of the most valuable actually of the properties. It's in Rathmichael, which is a much sought after area, Ferndale Glen, and the case was brought against Patrick O'Brien, his wife Margaret, and their son Timmy O'Brien, and his wife Joanne Connors, who had paid €325,000 for this site.
Yep. And this
Rathmichael is really good land, really good property there.
And it was the purchase of this property, which is, I think, caught the attention of a local cab profiler.
Okay.
And so they went looking at them and basically figured out that they were part of a burglary gang. The guys had been like members of the gang who they were connected to, including Timmy O'Brien. Would have been involved or suspected to have been involved in these kind of basically, raiding houses in plush areas. We see them in the likes of Melbourne. There's been a whole series of cases in Australia there. And they figured that as $1 million Australian dollars was sent back to Ireland through different bank accounts. And a lot of it was done kind of deliberately at kind of $3,000 here and $4,500 there. It was done at this kind of increment ant level, so as not to raise suspicions, raise flags. But then they went and bought a site for, I think $325,000 they paid for it, which raised flags here. And it put the whole ball in motion. As Margaret had been part of a previous cab case as well. She'd been mentioned in one against Pale Miley Connors back in, I think it was 2000 or 2016 as well. So, I mean, they're basically part of all that, those burglary gangs that we often talk about, linked to, Mercedes Mickey Wall and Fat Andy Connors and all that crew.
Mercedes Mickey Wall.
Angry Death as well, I think was one of his nicknames.
There was planning permission for a 5-bed property at one point on that site. That would, to put a property on a site in Rathmichael, you'd be talking well over the $1 million. I mean, it's probably one of the most sought after addresses in South County Dublin, Rathmichael. Had they links to the area, or did we know that? Where were they from, the O'Briens?
They're linked to West Dublin, and I mean, they're linked to the Connors. But I mean, there would be members of the family that would have been in some parts of South County Dublin over the years. I mean,
it's not that far from West Dublin anyway.
No, I mean, it's not a million miles. So, I mean, if you're looking for, something that you can put money into, and possibly use or even just sell later as a way of laundering your ill-gotten gains, it's quite possible that's what they were looking at. That it's so, they could transfer it to another buyer who could then sell it and sell it on again and then give them the money back. And, it's all these kind of attempts at trying to hide the origin of the cash.
So, anyway, these are all bulked together. Are they into one auction?
No, they're actually two separate auctions.
Okay.
But they are on the 27th of March, and 3 of them are with BRG auctions. It's online, and then the other ones are with Wilson's, and they're at 4 o'clock. So the first batch are going off between 12 and 1 o'clock. I think it is on the 27th, and the others then are at 4 o'clock.
And it was Wilson's, I think, who sold all that kit before Christmas that we had intended to get.
Yes, yeah, all the Rolexes
and the shoes and everything.
Yes,
So, look, I mean, I think this stuff is all very interesting. It's always interesting to look in behind the whole door of anybody's house, anyway. But particularly when it's people who have had these houses taken from them, and who have been living in them under the proceeds of crime, or perhaps hoping to retire into them or whatever. So it makes them extra interesting. So, okay, thanks, Eamon.
Always a pleasure, Nicola.
Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel.
and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.